Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Horizon watching the stars streak past as his ship moved through hyperspace toward the Zarian homeworld, and he felt proud to be leading this important mission to strengthen the bond between humans and the alien confederation. But he did not know that this journey would destroy his life forever. The mission seemed simple enough, and Jake had done dozens of diplomatic runs before as one of Earth's most trusted commanders, and his crew respected him, and the Galactic Council praised his work in keeping peace between different species, and Jake believed in the system that had brought so many worlds together under one peaceful government. When they arrived at Zarian, Prime Jake met with Counselor Vex Thorn, who welcomed the humans with great ceremony and spoke about friendship and cooperation between their peoples. But something felt wrong too. Jake, as he noticed how nervous the other Zarian officials looked during the meetings, and when he asked questions about recent colony expansions, Thorn changed the subject quickly. On the second day, Jake decided to explore the research facilities that Thorn had mentioned, and he took his security chief Pete Williams with him to visit what was supposed to be a peaceful science station, and they saw things that made Jake's blood run cold, because the facility was full of human prisoners being used for terrible experiments, and the scientists were taking DNA samples and testing how much pain humans could survive. Jake immediately contacted his ship and ordered his crew to prepare for emergency departure, but Thorn had been watching him, and alien soldiers surrounded Jake and Pete before they could escape, and Thorn smiled coldly as he explained that humans were perfect test subjects because they never gave up fighting, even when facing certain death. Zarian leader told Jake that the Galactic Council knew about the experiments and helped cover them up because they feared human strength and wanted to find ways to control or copy human abilities. And Jake felt sick knowing that his own government had probably agreed to sacrifice human colonies to keep the peace with stronger alien species. Thorn offered Jake a choice between joining the conspiracy and keeping quiet about what he had seen, or facing the consequences of trying to expose the truth. Jake chose to fight, even though he knew it would cost him everything, and he managed to escape with Pete during a shift change. But their troubles were just beginning. When Jake returned to his ship, he found his communications officer, Lisa Carter, acting strangely, and she seemed nervous when he ordered her to send an emergency message to Earth Command about the Zarian experiments, and Jake soon discovered that Carter had been working as a spy for the Council and had already sent false reports claiming that Jake was planning to attack innocent alien civilians. The trap closed around Jake within hours, as Council warships appeared and demanded his surrender for war crimes against the Zarian people, and the evidence against him looked perfect because his own ship's weapons showed signs of recent firing, and security footage appeared to show Jake giving orders to attack the research station where he had actually been a prisoner. Jake's own crew began to doubt him as more evidence appeared, and even Pete started to wonder if his captain had lost his mind under the stress of command. And Carter testified that Jake had been acting paranoid and aggressive for weeks, and had talked about teaching the aliens a lesson for treating humans as inferior. Trial was a mockery of justice, and Jake tried to present evidence of the human experiments, but the Council dismissed his claims as the desperate lies of a war criminal, and they showed video footage of Jake apparently ordering the attack on peaceful researchers, and the testimony of his own crew members who had been threatened or bribed to speak against him. Jake's wife, Amy, received orders from Earth Command to distance herself from her husband or face court-martial herself, and she filed for divorce, while Jake sat in a prison cell waiting for his sentence, and his children were taken to live with Amy's parents, who changed their names to avoid the shame of being related to Earth's most notorious traitor. Earth's government publicly condemned Jake and stripped him of all military honors and medals to show the Galactic Council that humans could police their own criminals, and Jake realized that his own species had sold him out to protect their position in the galactic community, and he felt more alone than Ever before, the sentence was exile to the void sector, where the worst criminals and outcasts were sent to die slowly among pirates and slavers. And Jake would lose his citizenship and all legal protections, and no civilized world would help him, or even acknowledge his existence. And then, Council wanted him to disappear completely on the day of his departure. Jake stood in chains as the transport ship prepared to leave, and he saw Carter watching from the observation deck with what might have been guilt in her eyes, but she said nothing as the man who had once been her respected captain was led away like a common criminal. Transport ship was old and dirty, and filled with other exiles, including murderers and thieves who looked at Jake with curiosity because everyone had heard about the human commander who had tried to start a war with the Zarian, and Jake said nothing as the ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying him toward a region of space where law and order meant nothing as the stars changed outside the small porthole Jake made. A silent promise to himself that he would survive whatever the void sector threw at him, and someday he would return to expose the truth about the Galactic Council's crimes against humanity, and he would make them pay for destroying his life and betraying his trust in the system he had served faithfully for so many years. The transport ship dumped Jake at Outpost 7, a ramshackle space station built inside a dead asteroid where the worst criminals in the galaxy came to hide from justice, and the station master was a scarred alien who barely glanced at Jake's papers before waving him through customs into the main corridor, where the air smelled of engine fuel and desperation. Jake had no money and no friends, and his Earth military uniform marked him as an easy target for the pirates and smugglers who controlled the station, but his combat training kept him alive through the first few dangerous weeks as he learned the brutal rules of life in the void sector where strength and cunning mattered more than law or morality. The first job Jake found was working security for a Zentari smuggler named Kex, who needed someone to watch his back during dangerous cargo runs to outlaw worlds. And Jake hated protecting criminals, but he needed credits to survive, and Kex paid well for someone who could shoot straight and think fast under pressure during a run to the mining world of Blackrock. Jake met other human exiles who had been cast out by their own government for various crimes, and he realized that Earth was using the void sector as a dumping ground for anyone who threatened the delicate peace with alien species, and many of the humans he met were guilty of nothing more than asking difficult questions. Jake's reputation as a fighter grew quickly, and soon other smugglers and pirates were offering him work as a mercenary and tactical advisor, and he discovered that his military experience was valuable in a region where every job might turn into a firefight, and he began building the network of contacts that would serve him well. In the years ahead, 2 years after his exile, Jake was hired to provide security for a refugee convoy that was carrying human survivors from a colony that had been destroyed by Krathan slavers, and during the journey he met Dr. Helen Brooks, who had been studying genetic experiments on human subjects before her research facility was shut down by Council forces. Helen told Jake that his suspicions about the Zarian experiments were correct, and that the genetic harvesting program was much larger than he had imagined, and she had evidence that multiple alien species were working together to study and copy the traits that made humans so difficult to defeat in combat, and she had been exiled for refusing to turn over her research data to the Council. The convoy was attacked by Krathan raiders while passing through the nebula of lost ships, and Jake led the defense using old Earth military tactics that confused the alien attackers who expected refugees to surrender without a fight. And his strategy saved most of the convoy, but several ships were lost, and dozens of humans were captured for the slave markets. After the battle, Jake realized that he could not save humanity by hiding in the shadows and working small jobs for criminals, and he needed to find other people who shared his desire to fight back against the system that had betrayed them, and he began reaching out to former Council officials and military officers who had been exiled for similar reasons Marcus Cole was one of those officers, and he had been an investigator for the Galactic Council until he discovered evidence of corruption among high-ranking officials, and when he tried to report his findings, he was framed for accepting bribes and sent to this void sector to silence him, and Marcus had valuable inside knowledge about how the Council operated. Jake also recruited Nina Ross, a former Council security officer who had witnessed atrocities committed by peacekeeping forces, and Ryan Clark, a computer specialist who had been exiled for hacking into classified Council databases. And each new member brought skills and connections that made the growing resistance movement stronger. The group established their base on an abandoned mining asteroid that they named Sanctuary, and they began collecting refugees and outcasts who had nowhere else to go, and Jake's military experience helped them turn the asteroid into a fortress where Council forces would find it difficult to attack, and they started planning operations against Council targets. Their first major success came when they rescued a group of human prisoners from a Krathan slave ship, and the operation required careful planning and precise timing, but Jake's team managed to board the ship during a supply stop and free over 200 humans who had been captured from various colonies. Word of the rescue spread quickly through the underground networks, and soon other resistance cells were contacting Jake for advice and support, and he realized that there were thousands of beings throughout the galaxy who were ready to fight against Council oppression if someone would give them hope. And leadership. Jake's name began appearing in Council security reports as a person of interest, and bounty hunters started arriving in the void sector looking for the human exile who was causing trouble for the established order, and Jake had to become more careful about his movements, but he refused to stop helping people who needed protection. The resistance movement grew stronger with each successful operation, and Jake found himself becoming a symbol of hope for oppressed beings throughout the galaxy, and he received messages from human colonies asking for help against Council forces and from alien species who had suffered under the corrupt government. Helen continued her research using equipment salvaged from abandoned facilities, and she discovered that the genetic experiments were part of a larger project called Genesis that was designed to create hybrid super soldiers using DNA from the most resilient species in the galaxy, and humans were among the primary targets because of their refusal to surrender. Marcus used his knowledge of Council procedures to intercept communications and gather intelligence about planned operations against human colonies, and the information helped Jake save many lives, but it also revealed the true scope of the conspiracy against humanity and other species who were seen as threats to Council power. As Jake's second year in exile ended, he looked around the command center of Sanctuary and saw the faces of people who had lost everything but refused to give up hope, and he knew that the exile that was meant to destroy him had instead given him the chance to build something that could challenge the corrupt system that ruled the galaxy. Jake's resistance movement had grown from a handful of exiles into a network of freedom fighters that stretched across dozens of star systems, and ships arrived at Sanctuary every week carrying new recruits who had heard stories about the human commander who stood up to the Galactic Council and refused to be silenced. Movement needed a name, and after much discussion, they settled on calling themselves the Free Fleet because they represented all the species and individuals who wanted to break free from Council oppression, and Jake was chosen as the overall commander, while Marcus handled intelligence gathering and Helen coordinated medical and research operations. Their biggest test came when the Council sent a pacification force to the human colony world of Haven, which had been asking too many questions about missing settlers, and the Council claimed that Haven was harboring terrorists, but Jake knew they really wanted to silence the colonists who had discovered evidence of genetic harvesting operations. Jake decided to make a stand at Haven even though his forces were outnumbered 10 to 1 by the Council fleet, and he used his knowledge of human military tactics to plan a defense that would turn the planet's natural features into weapons against the attacking ships, and he knew this battle would determine whether the Free Fleet could really challenge. Council power. The battle began when Council ships dropped out of hyperspace, expecting to find a helpless colony with minimal defenses, but instead they encountered a carefully planned ambush as Free Fleet ships hiding in the asteroid belt opened fire and disabled several Council vessels before they could react properly. Jake commanded the defense from the surface using modified mining equipment to create anti-ship weapons, and the colonists fought alongside Free Fleet soldiers to protect their homes and families, and the combination of desperate courage and superior tactics allowed the defenders to hold their ground against overwhelming odds. When Council ground forces landed, they found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to follow the normal rules of engagement, and Jake's guerrilla tactics confused the alien commanders who expected humans to surrender when faced with superior firepower, but instead found themselves trapped in a deadly game of cat and mouse. Turning point came when Ryan Clark managed to hack into the Council command ship and broadcast the battle across pirate communication networks throughout the galaxy, and beings on dozens of worlds watched as a small force of humans and outcasts defeated a much larger Council fleet. Through determination and clever strategy, Admiral Rex Kane commanded the Council forces, and he had once been Jake's mentor at the Earth Naval Academy. But now he believed his former student had become a dangerous terrorist who threatened galactic peace, and Kane could not understand how the promising young officer he had trained could turn against everything they had sworn to protect. The battle lasted 3 days and ended when the remaining Council ships retreated after losing more than half their fleet to what should have been an easy victory against untrained colonists. And the defeat sent shockwaves through Council headquarters as they realized that the human exile was becoming a serious threat to their authority. News of the victory at Haven spread like wildfire through the underground networks and resistance. Movements on dozens of worlds began reaching out to Jake for support and advice, and many species that had remained neutral in the conflict started questioning whether the Council really represented their interests. The Council response was swift and brutal as they increased the bounty on Jake's head to 5 million credits and deployed their elite Enforcer Corps to hunt down Free Fleet operatives, and several resistance cells were destroyed by surprise attacks, but the movement continued to grow as new recruits replaced those who were captured or killed. Jake realized that military victories alone would not be enough to defeat the Council because they controlled most of the galaxy's communication networks and could suppress news of their crimes, and he needed to find a way to expose the truth about Project Genesis to the entire galactic population at once. Research had uncovered more details about the genetic experiments, and she discovered that the Council was not just harvesting DNA from humans and other species, but was actually trying to create a master race of hybrid soldiers that would be completely loyal to Council leadership, and the project threatened the independence of every species in the galaxy. Marcus intercepted communications revealing that Councilor Vex Thorn was planning to attend the Grand Council Assembly on the capital world of Nexus Prime, where representatives from every member species would gather for the annual meeting, and Jake realized this would be the perfect opportunity to expose the conspiracy to the entire galaxy. The plan was incredibly dangerous because Nexus Prime was the most heavily defended world in Council space, and security would be at maximum levels during the assembly. But Jake knew they might never get another chance to reach so many people at once, and he began planning the most audacious operation in Free Fleet history. Kane was given command of the task force hunting Jake, and he genuinely believed that his former student had been corrupted by his time in the Void Sector and needed to be stopped before he could cause more damage to galactic peace. And Kane studied Jake's tactics and personality, looking for weaknesses he could exploit. Free Fleet began gathering intelligence about Nexus Prime and its defenses while Jake recruited specialists for the mission, including former Council employees who knew the layout of government facilities and hackers who could break through the security systems protecting the Assembly Broadcast Network. Jake also reached out to sympathetic contacts within the Council itself because he knew there had to be officials who were troubled by the genetic experiments but were afraid to speak out against their superiors, and he found several low-level employees who were willing to help expose the truth. As preparations for the mission continued, Jake reflected on how much his life had changed since his exile began, and he had gone from being a respected council officer to leading a galaxy-wide resistance movement. And he wondered if his former wife, Amy, ever thought about him, or if she still believed he was a traitor. The Free Fleet had become Jake's new family, and the people around him had sacrificed everything to fight for justice and freedom, and he felt a responsibility to them that went beyond his original desire for personal revenge against those who had destroyed his life and reputation. Training for the Nexus Prime mission was intense because every team member would need to perform perfectly under extreme pressure, and Jake pushed his people hard, but they responded with dedication because they believed in the cause and trusted their commander to lead them safely through the most dangerous operation any of them had ever attempted. The Free Fleet had become a legend throughout the galaxy as stories spread about Jake Morrison and his band of outcasts who struck at Council facilities and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive, and every successful raid brought more volunteers to the cause, and more species began questioning the official version of events. Jake's forces conducted a series of daring operations against genetic research facilities and slave camps scattered across Council space, and they used hit and run tactics that made it impossible for the enemy to predict where they would strike next, and each victory proved that the supposedly invincible Council could be defeated by determined fighters. The liberation of Research Station Alpha was their most spectacular success, as Jake led a team that infiltrated the heavily guarded facility and freed over 300 test subjects from a dozen different species, and the rescued prisoners provided horrifying testimony about the experiments they had endured, and the evidence was broadcast across pirate networks before Council forces could suppress it. Dr. Helen Brooks had established medical facilities on several worlds where former test subjects could receive treatment for the genetic modifications that had been forced upon them, and her work helped prove that the Council's claims about peaceful research were lies designed to cover up crimes against sentient beings. The breakthrough came when Free Fleet hackers managed to capture a Council research vessel carrying classified data about a Project Genesis, and Ryan Clark's team spent weeks decrypting the files while avoiding pursuit by Enforcer core ships, and what they found was worse than anyone had imagined. The documents revealed that Project Genesis was designed to create hybrid super soldiers using genetic material from species that showed exceptional resilience and fighting ability, and humans were at the top of the target list because they never surrendered, even when facing impossible odds, and Council scientists wanted to copy that trait. Plan involved harvesting entire human colonies and using their populations for breeding programs that would produce warriors completely loyal to the Council. And similar programs were being developed for other species that possessed useful characteristics, and the ultimate goal was to replace the current galactic population with genetically modified servants. Jake realized that the conspiracy went far beyond simple prejudice against humans and threatened the very existence of free will throughout the galaxy. And he knew that every species would face extinction or slavery if Project Genesis succeeded, and this knowledge gave new urgency to his mission. News of Project Genesis spread through underground communication networks and reached worlds that had previously supported the Council, and protest movements erupted on dozens of planets as citizens demanded answers about missing family. Members and unexplained government policies. Several minor governments withdrew from council jurisdiction and declared independence, while others demanded investigations into their own research facilities, and the political situation became increasingly unstable as more evidence of council crimes came to light through Free Fleet operations. Jake's reputation had grown to mythical proportions among oppressed beings throughout the galaxy, and songs were written about the human commander who refused to stay silent, and children on enslaved worlds whispered stories about the day when Jake Morrison would come to set them free. Council was forced to admit that they faced a serious threat to their authority, and they deployed massive resources to hunt down Free Fleet operatives while launching a propaganda campaign designed to portray Jake as a terrorist who threatened galactic peace and stability. Admiral Kane's task force had tracked several Free Fleet cells, but Jake always seemed to be one step ahead of their operations, and Kane began to suspect that his former student was receiving help from inside the council itself, and he started investigating his own officers for signs of disloyalty. A cat and mouse game between Kane and Jake intensified as both men used their knowledge of each other's tactics to gain advantages in their ongoing conflict, and Kane's respect for his former student's abilities grew even as he remained convinced that Jake had become a dangerous criminal who needed to be stopped. Jake established contact with former journalist Alex Turner, who had been blacklisted by council media for asking uncomfortable questions about government policies, and Turner agreed to help coordinate the Free Fleet's information warfare campaign, and his experience proved invaluable in reaching mainstream audiences. Free Fleet's intelligence network had grown to include sympathetic contacts within the council bureaucracy and military, and these sources provided warnings about planned operations against resistance cells and helped Jake avoid several traps that had been set by Enforcer Corps units. Jake also received support from unexpected sources as alien species that had previously remained neutral began providing supplies and safe passage for Free Fleet operations, and he realized that the Council's support was cracking under the weight of mounting evidence about their crimes. Planned to expose Project Genesis during the Grand Council assembly required precise timing and flawless execution, because they would only have one chance to break through the security systems and broadcast the evidence before being stopped, and Jake knew that failure would mean the end of the resistance. Movement preparations for the mission involved months of careful planning as the Free Fleet gathered intelligence about Nexus Prime's defenses and identified the best infiltration routes, and Jake recruited the most skilled operatives from across the galaxy and trained them for their specific roles in the operation. Jake's inner circle included Marcus Cole, who would coordinate intelligence gathering, Helen Brooks, who would provide scientific analysis of the evidence, Ryan Clark, who would handle the technical aspects of the broadcast, and Nina Ross, who would lead the security team protecting the operation. The emotional cost of leading the resistance was taking its toll on Jake as he carried the responsibility for thousands of lives and the weight of knowing that failure would doom countless beings to slavery or death. And he sometimes wondered if the young officer who had believed in the Council's mission would recognize the man he had become as the date for the Grand Council assembly approached. Jake felt the same mixture of fear and determination that had sustained him through years of exile, and he knew that everything he had fought for would be decided in the next few days, and the galaxy would never be the same, regardless of whether the mission succeeded or failed. The Grand Council Assembly was the most important political event in the galaxy, as representatives from every member species gathered on Nexus Prime to discuss policies that would affect billions of beings and the security around the capital. World was tighter than ever before, with Council warships patrolling every approach. Root Jake's team had spent months preparing for this moment, and they used stolen Council codes, provided by sympathetic insiders, to slip past the outer defenses. disguised as maintenance workers and journalists, and Alex. Turner's press credentials helped them gain access to the assembly complex, where the opening ceremonies would be broadcast to every world in Council space. The infiltration required perfect timing as different team members moved into position throughout the massive government complex, and Ryan Clark's technical team worked to hack into the main BROADCAST system, while Jake and Nina Ross provided security and watched for signs that their presence had been detected. Helen Brooks carried the encrypted data files containing evidence of Project Genesis, and she would provide scientific commentary during the broadcast to help viewers understand the full implications of what they were seeing, and her reputation as a respected researcher would give credibility to the shocking revelations. Opening ceremony began with traditional speeches about peace and cooperation between species, while Jake's team made final preparations. In hidden locations throughout the complex, and millions of beings across the galaxy watched their screens expecting routine political coverage, but about to witness History Counselor Vex Thorne delivered a speech about the Council's commitment to protecting all member species from threats to galactic stability, and Jake felt sick listening to the lies from the man who had orchestrated his downfall and was responsible for countless atrocities committed in the name of genetic research. Ryan Clark's signal indicated that the hack was complete and the broadcast system was under Free Fleet control, and Jake gave the order to begin transmission as Helen stepped in front of the hidden cameras that would carry her message to billions of viewers who had no idea what they were about to see. The evidence of Project Genesis flooded screens across the galaxy as Helen calmly explained the scientific data, while horrifying images of genetic experiments appeared alongside official counsel documents that proved the conspiracy existed at the highest levels of government, and the reaction in the assembly chambers was immediate chaos. Several council members leaped from their seats, demanding that the broadcast be stopped, while others tried to deny the evidence or claim it had been falsified. But Helen's scientific analysis was overwhelming, and testimony from rescued prisoners made the truth undeniable, and viewers could see the panic on official faces. Counselor Thorne's face went pale as he realized his crimes were being exposed to the entire galaxy, and he tried to leave the chamber, but Free Fleet operatives had anticipated this and blocked the exits while continuing to broadcast evidence of his role in organizing the genetic harvesting program. The security alert sounded throughout the complex as Council forces realized they were under attack from within, and Jake's team fought running battles through corridors while protecting the broadcast equipment, and Helen continued her testimony even as explosions echoed through the building. Admiral Kane arrived with a full company of enforcer troops, but he stopped in shock when he saw the evidence being broadcast and finally understood that his former student had been telling the truth all along, and the system they had both served was built on lies and atrocities. Jake found himself face to face with Kane in the main broadcast center, and for a moment the two men stared at each other across years of conflict and misunderstanding, and Kane slowly lowered his weapon as he realized the magnitude of the conspiracy that had destroyed so many lives. The Admiral's voice was filled with pain and regret as he spoke into his communication device, ordering his troops to stand down and protect the Free Fleet operatives from other Council forces. And Kane knew his career was over, but he could not continue serving a government that committed genocide. Thorne made a desperate attempt to escape using his personal transport, but Marcus Cole had anticipated this, and Free Fleet ships captured the fleeing counselor, along with additional evidence about other Council conspiracies that had been hidden for decades. The broadcast continued for over an hour as more evidence was presented and rescued prisoners gave testimony about their experiences, and the galactic audience watched in horror as the true nature of their government was revealed, and protests erupted on worlds throughout Council space gains. Sacrifice allowed Jake's team to complete their mission, but the Admiral paid with his life as other Council forces loyal to the conspiracy killed him for his betrayal, and Jake felt genuine grief for his former mentor who had finally chosen to do the right thing. The political earthquake that followed the broadcast brought down governments across the galaxy as species demanded answers about their missing people, and several worlds declared independence from Council rule while others called for the immediate dissolution of the corrupt organization. Jake's team escaped from Nexus Prime, using the confusion caused by riots and protests. But their victory came at a heavy cost, as several operatives were killed during the fighting, and Jake knew their sacrifice had saved countless lives by exposing the truth. Evidence presented during the broadcast was impossible to deny or suppress, and independent investigations confirmed every detail while uncovering additional crimes that the Council had committed against member species, and the calls for justice grew louder with each new revelation. Thorn's capture provided access to even more classified information about genetic research programs, and Jake realized that Project Genesis was only one part of a larger plan to transform the galaxy into a totalitarian state controlled by a small group of Council leaders. Free Fleet had achieved its primary objective of exposing the conspiracy, but Jake knew the fight was far from over, because the forces behind Project Genesis would not give up power without a struggle, and the galaxy needed new leadership that could be trusted to serve the people rather than exploit them. As news of the successful mission spread through Free Fleet networks, Jake felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness, because the victory had vindicated his years of struggle, but could not restore the life that had been taken from him or bring back the people who had died fighting for justice. The man who had been branded a traitor and terrorist was now recognized as a hero who had saved the galaxy from tyranny. But Jake took no pleasure in personal vindication, because too many innocent people had suffered while he fought to expose the truth about Council crimes. The collapse of the Galactic Council happened faster than anyone expected, as member species withdrew their support and demanded justice for the crimes committed against their people, and within 6 months, the corrupt government that had ruled for centuries was replaced by a new federation based on democratic principles and respect for the rights of all beings. Jake Morrison received a full pardon from Earth's government, along with restoration of his military rank and all the honors that had been stripped from him during his exile. But when officials offered him a position as Admiral of the new Earth Space Force, he politely declined, because he had found a different purpose. The Free Fleet evolved from a resistance movement into an independent peacekeeping organization that operated across the galaxy, helping worlds rebuild after the trauma of Council rule, and Jake remained as its commander because he believed the work was too important to abandon for the comfort of returning to his old life. Helen Brooks established the Genesis Memorial Institute on the former Council capital world and dedicated her life to healing the victims of genetic experimentation while ensuring that such atrocities could never happen again. And her research helped thousands of survivors recover from the modifications that had been forced upon them. Marcus Cole became the Federation's first independent investigator with authority to investigate corruption anywhere in known space, and his knowledge of how the old system had operated made him invaluable in rooting out the remaining supporters of the fallen regime. Ryan Clark used his technical skills to build communication networks that could not be controlled by any single government, and his work ensured that information would flow freely throughout the galaxy and prevent future conspiracies from hiding their crimes from the public. Nina Ross returned to law enforcement as head of the new Federation Security Service, and she implemented policies that protected the rights of citizens while maintaining order, and her experience with the Free Fleet helped her understand the importance of serving the people rather than political leaders. The trials of Council officials lasted for years as investigators uncovered the full scope of their crimes, and Counselor Vex Thorn was sentenced to life imprisonment on a maximum security world, where he would spend his remaining years thinking about the suffering He had caused Jake's former wife, Amy, reached out to him after his vindication became public, and she apologized for abandoning him during his darkest hour. But Jake forgave her because he understood the impossible position she had been placed in by Earth's government, and they remained friends, though they never remarried. Children who had been forced to change their names to avoid association with their father now proudly carried the Morrison name, and Jake was able to establish relationships with them, though the years of separation had created barriers that would take time to overcome. Lisa Carter also sought Jake's forgiveness for her role in his downfall, and she explained that she had been blackmailed by council agents who threatened to kill her family if she did not cooperate, and Jake understood her choice, though the betrayal still caused him pain. Pete Williams remained with the Free Fleet as Jake's chief engineer, and the two men had developed an unbreakable bond during their years fighting together against impossible odds, and Pete often said that serving with Jake had been the greatest honor of his life. Memorial services for those who had died fighting against the Council were attended by beings from hundreds of worlds, and Jake spoke at many of these ceremonies, honoring the courage of people who had sacrificed everything for the cause of freedom. And Justice Jake was offered positions in the new Federation government, including the role of first human representative to the Democratic Council, but he preferred working in the field where he could directly help people who needed protection, and his reputation opened doors that might otherwise remain closed. The statue of Jake Morrison that was erected in the Capitol Plaza of New Geneva bore an inscription that read, "He stood alone when others fell silent," and similar monuments appeared on dozens of worlds that had been liberated by Free Fleet operations. Jake rarely visited these monuments because he was uncomfortable with the hero worship that had grown around his legend, and he preferred to focus on current missions rather than dwell on past victories, and he often told his crew that legends were just people who refused to give up the Free Fleet operated from a network of bases throughout the galaxy, and Jake's ships carried supplies to refugee camps and provided security for worlds that were still recovering from the trauma of Volma. Council rule and every mission reinforced his belief that the work was worthwhile. Years passed, and Jake's hair turned gray, but his determination never wavered as he continued to fight for those who could not protect themselves, and he found satisfaction in knowing that the galaxy was a better place because people had been willing to stand up against tyranny. The young officers who served under Jake learned lessons about leadership and moral courage that no academy could teach, and many of them went on to establish their own organizations dedicated to protecting the innocent, and serving the cause of justice. Jake's story was taught in schools across the galaxy as an example of how one person's refusal to accept injustice could change the course of history, and children learned that even when facing overwhelming odds, it was possible to make a difference if you never gave up hope. Man they had tried to erase had become the legend who saved them all, and Jake Morrison's name would be remembered long after the politicians and officials of his era were forgotten, because he had proven that sometimes the greatest victories come from those the powerful try to silence on quiet nights. When his ship was traveling between stars, Jake would look out at the vast darkness and remember the young officer who had believed in the system, and he wondered what that man would think of the choices he had made and the life he had built. Galaxy learned that humans were not just another species to be controlled or exploited, but were capable of inspiring others to be better than they thought possible, and Jake Morrison's legacy lived on in every being who chose to stand up against oppression, regardless of the personal cost.